right, y'all. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to talk about Longhorn football. I ironically do want to talk about some colleges to start our conversation here today. And you may not believe it, but I actually grew up with a very particular school that was at the bottom of the barrel for me. There was one for about half of my life that I could not stand, and I want to start with that. And that school that I hated was the University of Texas at Austin. And the reason was I moved here from Ohio when I was 10 years old. So I was an Ohio State fan, and I hated that team up north, Michigan. But Texas was what I was surrounded by and could not escape. Like, y'all would not shut up. It was just like burnt orange, Longhorn talk everywhere. And I moved here the year that Vince Young won the national championship. So it was even worse. If you go to DKR games today, they show some black and white footage. It was a long time ago. But, it's just a tough time for me. And so I kept that attitude all the way through my upperclassmen years of high school, junior, senior year. I really didn't know where I would end up going. And I remember I went on a series of college visits all with the same group of friends each time and had some really good experiences. I remember we went and we visited Rice first. And I'd heard just really good things like Ivy League of the South. And somebody told me that they don't have Greek life, but that they have these houses that are very reminiscent of Hogwarts. And it's like Harry Potter in real life. And I'm like, I'm in. I wrote Rice off for an embarrassing reason. I just had done no research. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I just knew that I wanted to do business school because I felt like that was a respectable degree to have when you don't know what you want to do with the rest of your life. We go all the way to Houston, all the way to Rice to find out that not only is their undergraduate business program not highly esteemed or highly ranked, it does not exist. They do not have an undergraduate business program. So I had to go all the way to Houston just to figure that out. So that's a day I'll never get back, but it was still a good experience. Then we visited Baylor next, and I loved Baylor. I thought it was an awesome experience. I don't know if we have any Baylor Bears in here. I like the size, the culture. I still think fondly of it, just because of that one day. I just didn't know if I wanted to live in Waco on purpose for 4 years, right? A day trip, I get it, but I don't know. So that was the main hang up for me there. And then that same group of friends, we went and we visited this place, which if you're not from around here, that's not a state penitentiary. That's that's College Station. They just like the color brown, I guess. But I know you're probably not going to believe me, but I was really open. I was genuinely curious. One of my best friends was a year older. He was already attending there. So I really had an openness to Texas A&M. I don't know how often I've heard God speak in some divine way in my life, but I think don't go to A&M maybe is the clearest he ever was. It's just a weird series of events. We had an 8 a.m. college visit, which is early for high school kids, right? We got up early and we went there and we show up for our 8 a.m. visit. And they said based on whatever computer system they used or stone tablets there, I don't know, they had double booked the visit. And so they said, we rebooked you for 4 p.m. today. And we were like, well, it's 8 hours from now. We drove so far away. So it's a rough first experience. We didn't even really get the tour of the visit. But my buddy, Jared, who's one of my groomsmen, one of my best friends still today, he said, okay, you can't write it off until you've been to a football game at Kyle Field. It's unlike anything else. And I'm like, all right. So I go back. I'm standing in the student section. I'm excited. And just a couple minutes of the game, I realize that I've made a grave mistake because everybody around me starts slapping themselves and yelling and hooping and hissing. And I'm like, what in the cult did I just show up in? They were number 9 Texas A&M. Ryan Tannehill was their quarterback. He's still in the NFL today, playing today. And they lost in overtime to an unranked Missouri team. So everybody was depressed all weekend long. My third time there, I got in a car accident. it just wasn't meant to be for me personally. How I view Aggies today, honestly, some of the most important Aggies some of the most important people in my life are Aggies. I love them individually. They seem like they tend to be just great people. You put them in a group and things get weird. It's just how I see it. I share all that. Obviously, I ended up going to the University of Texas, having a great experience there. But I share all that not because of anything UT related, but more because it's interesting to note that colleges have the science down when it comes to their annual cycle of people coming in every year, right? Like they know when to start sending letters, when to start sending emails. They have the whole tour down. And if you go, they're going to tell you the story of the university, of this dorm, of this library or this school, right? They're going to tell you the story story and what they value. And they're going to try to paint a picture of how your story could be different if you combine your story with their story, right? They're going to like paint this idealized future that you could one day be a part of. They're going to tell you, hey, if you come here and you wear our colors, and if you take on our identity, you know, I am a Longhorn, or I am a Sooner, or whatever it may be, if you invest a lot of money here in this institution, that your future is going to be better, or going to be different. When it comes to church world, we don't have one specific week in early August every year where all of the new people are here and all the new people need to be oriented, right? In church world, that's an assumption that every single Sunday there are new people. Every single Sunday there are guests trying to figure out, is this my place? Is this where I want to plug in? Is this where I want to be involved? And it's for that reason that today we want to just pause and have kind of a one-off conversation. We'll start a brand new series next week, but just have this one-off conversation in this not series, but one-off called No Longer Difficult, where we want to talk about the why behind why we do what we do. We want to talk about some of the foundational things that we value and what it is that we dream of, what it is that we picture in the future. And the reason we want to do that is because should you choose to get involved in a local church, that's a decision kind of unlike anything else in culture. You don't just come here and consume things, right? This isn't like arguing about your favorite HEB, although I know we can get really passionate about that. But a church, it's not a building, right? It's not just the physical location. The church is the people that are a part of it. If you choose to get involved in a local church, you know, over time, you don't just attend Northpoint like you are Northpoint. There's that weird switch that happens. It's not just somebody on stage or on staff, but we all collectively are Northpoint together when you engage. It's the place that potentially a local church, when it's at its very best, is the place that you are known and know others, are supported and support others. It's the place that you can find meaning and purpose, and where you can grow in the most important areas of your life, relationally, grow personally, grow in terms of your character, grow in terms of your faith, and perhaps a personal relationship with Jesus. And so it's important to know those things, right? And every now and then we just like to pause and say, hey, this is kind of the why, so that if you're here today, maybe for the first time, or you've only been here a few times, I mean, this is perfect timing where you can kind of see like, okay, what is all this place all about? And do I align with that? And if you've been here maybe a little while, maybe, 6 months or something, and you've been attending, and maybe your kids have had a good experience, or maybe there's some things that you've heard that you've enjoyed, but it's kind of like I'm on the outside looking in. Maybe this is the perfect conversation today to say, how do I take a step? What does it look like to get a degree more involved or engaged? And for others of you, you've been fully engaged here for a long time, for years now. And part of this conversation is just a thank you to you today, and an acknowledgement that every now and then we kind of have to go back to the basics. We have to have our Vince Lombardi, this is a football type moment to say, if we get misaligned on the foundational type things, then there's going to be sideways energy. There's going to be confusion. And ultimately, the longer you're here, the more that you could ideally speak about in your own language, kind of communicate these foundational things to others. So I hope wherever you are on that today is helpful. We're not just talking local church Northpoint, but we're even talking Big C church. And we're going to start in a foundational passage that lays out so much of the why for all of the future church, for all of the Big C church across the world. That is one where a specific verse in the middle we've actually had painted backstage, and we come out and we see this verse as a reminder of why we do what we do. And after I share this passage, then I just kind of want to talk about, okay, what does that look like today in our context and the part of the world that we live in? And how can you personally take a step or a next step and get involved in that, should you so choose at the end? But where I want to jump to today, this kind of foundational passage, it's in Acts, which is a little hard to say publicly. That's ACTS, not like Axe body spray or anything else that may sound like. It's the document that really, to me, is so compelling because of the fact that we shouldn't have it. It documents the story of the church, the history of the church immediately after the life of Jesus. And every honest historian will tell you we can't explain why we have the Acts of the Apostles, because this Jewish carpenter turned rabbi named Jesus, once he was crucified, that should have been game over. Like the Jewish elite should have won, the Roman Empire should have won. It never should have become the official religion of the Roman Empire 300 years later. We don't really understand how Jesus survived unless you're allowed to grant the resurrection of Jesus. That's what puts everything in place. And so Acts is this pivotal book because it's the life after Jesus, and it gives a lot of ideals of what the church could be at its best. And in the first 14 chapters, there's a lot of momentum building. Basically, people by the thousands, both that were born Jewish, so kind of born amongst God's chosen people, if you will, and the Gentiles, which is a word that just means nations. It's all other people. It's anybody not born into God's chosen people. So it's the rest of the world, the rest of the nations. How is it that these two groups of people are both becoming Christians by the thousands? We see lots of momentum, some of the most important cities in the world. And then in 15, which is where we're going to pick up today, there's a huge speed bump. Because in 15, there's an idea introduced that if it were to take hold, will poison the entire enterprise. In fact, at times throughout church history, a version of this idea absolutely has. It can derail everything that Jesus came for, everything that Jesus was about, and the core message of Christianity. And it's starting to spread and get shared. And there's this aggressive reaction kind of against it that we're going to see in 15 here. So here's where it starts, right in verse 1, in Acts 15:1. It says, while Paul and Barnabas were at Antioch of Syria, some men from Judea arrived and began to teach the believers, unless you were circumcised, as required by the law of Moses, you cannot be saved. To which all the husbands said, honey, I'm going to stay in the car. You go ahead and check that place out, right? I mean, could you imagine if this took on? Could you imagine the difficulty required, especially when you start to throw in the other 600 some odd laws and customs of the Old Testament, if that was a part of? But some guys were starting to say this, and then they were actually Christians. This wasn't like a Judaism versus Christianity thing. What they were saying is, yes, Jesus died for us. Yes, you're made right with God through him. You just have to be part of the right us, the right people group. And you do that by following these Jewish customs and laws, the law of Moses. Now, the first two people that we're introduced to here are Paul and Barnabas. So this is the same Paul that wrote about a third of our New Testament. And Barnabas, interestingly enough, he's cousins with one of the authors of the gospel. John Mark, one of the authors of the gospel. This is his cousin Barnabas. So these are two early leaders here that are really influential in the faith. And they're hearing this idea kind of be shared with them. And they're in an incredibly important church in Antioch. Antioch was the third largest city in the Roman Empire, which, by the way, just quick pause. Any guys in here, have you been asked over the last week or two by a female in your life how often you think about the Roman Empire? Does that happen for anybody? Just me? Okay, a couple hands around. Okay, well, it's just a TikTok thing. Don't worry about it if you haven't been. We all just collectively thought about it together, but I'm going to keep going on with the story. Because in the very next verse, what we see is we see Paul and we see Barnabas' reaction to this idea. Because it says Paul and Barnabas disagreed with them, arguing vehemently. This idea that it was a passionate rejection and response, which makes it even more unique that it's Paul. Paul's the freedom guy. If you look at Paul's letters, he understands what freedom in Christ is. He encourages us not to get bogged down in the peripheral things and argue and create this unity. He knows there's freedom in how we express our faith and how it is that we celebrate and how it is that we connect with Jesus. Like, he's like, man, all that stuff is just noise. So the fact that he gets so passionate about this, the fact that there's just strong emotional rejection and reaction, we understand that this is core. This is foundational. You cannot get this wrong, because as soon as you introduce the formula, it's Jesus plus. It's Jesus and. That what Jesus did was not enough. This is the very idea that puts the crack in the whole foundation. So he reacts strongly against this. And what they decide to do is they send him and Barnabas with a team to Jerusalem. It says the church had decided to send Paul and Barnabas to Jerusalem, accompanied by some local believers, to talk to the apostles and elders about this question. Now, this is not just, hey, go to the church next door and have this conversation. They're sending these two, as well as a team, we don't know who all is a part of that team, about 300 miles, right, from Antioch to maybe the most important city in human history, in Jerusalem, to go and connect with that church leadership there. So some of the most important leaders that have ever been a part of church, part of human history, are connecting at this location of the church in Jerusalem. And we get insight into basically what is kind of like the first ever church business meeting. And it goes maybe how you would think. It goes a very long time at first, but there's a pivotal conversation here taking place, because in 7 we see that Peter is also here. It says at the meeting, after a long discussion, could have been days, could have been weeks or months, Peter stood and addressed them as follows. Brothers, You all know that God chose me from among you some time ago to preach to the Gentiles so that they could hear the good news and believe. In other words, that's the work I have been doing. I am familiar with the world, with the culture, with what that looks like to make that decision, with what is compelling, how to empathize and connect. Like this is my world, this issue that's being raised here. And then he delivers what is one of the greatest sermons not preached by Jesus that we have recorded. It's just 4 verses long, and every line is so rich as he has a let's get back to the basics kind of moment. Look at the clarity he brings starting in verse 8. He says, God knows people's hearts. He knows your heart. He knows mine. He knows it better than we know ourselves. It's his primary concern. Yes, the external stuff matters, but it starts. What we do out here starts because of what's happening in our heart. It's his primary concern. And he confirmed that he accepts Gentiles, the nations, the rest of the world, by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. He made no distinction between us and them, for he cleansed their hearts through faith. We are all made right with God the same way through faith. And then he continues and expands on it in verse 10. He says, so why are you now challenging God? Notice he says, your argument is not with Paul. It's not with me, Peter. It's with God. Because what you are saying is God has not done enough. Jesus was not enough. His plan was insufficient. So you better take that up with God, because you are now making things unnecessarily difficult to connect with him, to be in relationship with him. You go one-on-one with him because you've got an issue with God now. You are now challenging God by burdening the Gentile believers with a yoke that neither we nor our ancestors were able to bear. This is a how dare you question. This is are you kidding me? You haven't followed the law. I haven't followed the law, much less the heroes of the faith, the Abrahams, the Moses. Like, we know nobody ever outside of the person of Jesus has held up to that standard. What are you doing? Why are you placing this pressure on them and making it unnecessarily difficult? We believe that we are all saved the same way, he says, by the undeserved grace of the Lord Jesus. Something we did not earn or deserve, but it's Jesus alone. Faith, trust, confidence in him alone, not Jesus and not Jesus plus. Interestingly enough, he's only kind of the opening act. I mean, he's really the warm-up for the guy that steals the show. Because in the next verse, we're introduced to our final person in this narrative, which is James. It says, when they had finished, James, the brother of Jesus, stood and said, brothers, listen to me. Now, even if you don't like kind of nerd out on the history stuff of this like me, maybe you're sitting here confused. Like, how did a bunch of guys in the Middle East 2,000 years ago have names like James and Paul and Peter? How does that work? I get it. Some of it's confusing. But if you just think about the weight of this moment for a second. In the Old Testament, we don't see this where all these heroes are kind of together very often because there's so much time in between. We see here Paul, who hasn't written a letter yet. So what's about to be decided and declared is about to inform so much of what we know today when he writes a third of our New Testament. We have Peter, whose original name was Simon, and then Jesus gives him a new name because Peter is the first one to declare, you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God, you're not just a good man, you're not just a teacher, you are something so much more than that. We've got Barnabas, who is cousins with Mark, an author of the Gospels. Maybe Luke. We don't know if he's an eyewitness here in the room or not. And a whole bunch of people not even listed. And then we've got James, the brother of Jesus, the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And all of these guys, some of the most important people who have ever lived in one room, having a conversation about the most foundational message, the most important news the world has ever known. And they're now deciding what's the outcome of that. What are we going to make sure we do not miss going forward? And James stands, to me, that's just something, a detail to add to the drama. I mean, he stands up, maybe slamming the desk. I would imagine he's passionate. And he starts by saying, it is my judgment, therefore. In the original language, it's actually a little confusing. It reads like, it's my judgment, or I myself have a judgment. He's being emphatic, like this is final. This is declarative. We will not compromise on this. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles, for the nations, for the world, who is turning to God. What if that was the one command that the church had always gotten right? What if that was the one that we stayed focused on, and of course the church has not? But what if that was people's perception of the church? Man, I disagree. Intellectually, I'm not on the same page. Different worldview. But man, they make it simple. Simple to connect with God, simple to connect with Jesus. He said, we cannot make it difficult for the Gentile, for the world that are turning to God. What they do is they write this summary up in a really short letter and they send it back to Antioch, and we get to see the response of the church in Antioch and what that means for them. It says the messengers went at once to Antioch, where they called a general meeting of the believers and delivered the letter, and there was great joy, especially amongst the husbands, throughout the church that day as they read this encouraging message. I mean, what if that's people's perception of the church? What if it was like, man, they carry a simple, a clear, encouraging message? A lot of people think Paul in Antioch started to write his first letters of the New Testament right after this meeting, and it informs so much of what we know today in our New Testament. The question for you and I then, in our context today, is how do we take this foundational concept, these marching orders, and how do we make sure that we do not make it difficult? How do we not make it difficult where you and I are today, where we have the responsibility, the opportunity to be in the time and place that we are? 14 years ago, when Northpoint launched, one of the foundational steps in starting really probably most organizations, but certainly any church, is to figure out a lay of the land, to do like your work, your research, look at kind of the demographics, the psychographics of an area, see what are the kind of the felt needs of the community, how can we come alongside and help and care for our community. And I don't know how often it is that you pause and think about the incredible place that we live in. But as a result of some of this research, we from the very beginning have had a realization like, man, we live in an incredible time and place. You can throw a rock from this building and you can hit just about the 5 fastest growing cities in the United States of America. Over the last 10 years, Georgetown has been the fastest growing. Leander has been the fastest growing. Cedar Park, Round Rock have been in the top 10. I mean, you think about the destination that we live in that people desire to be at. And again, Austin is rated by all kinds of different business journals and articles. There was a survey of mayors across the United States that rated Austin as the number 1 city most likely to influence the future of the United States. Because when you have a capital city in a state the size of Texas, you're combining politics, education, and universities here, sports, the art and music and entertainment scene that is here, technology and business that is here. You think about multiple events throughout the year that happen that bring people globally to this place. I mean, we live in a remarkable city. And if you believe what Paul says just 2 chapters later in Acts 17, apparently it's not an accident that we live where we live and when we live. Because in Acts 17, he says, from one man, he, meaning God, made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history when we would live, and the boundaries of their lands where we would live. God did this. Why? So that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. You are in the seat you are in, you are the spot you're watching online for the sole purpose to know that God is not far from any one of us. But the other thing that we discovered is that when you think about this incredible city that has so much influence on our country, on the world, one of the findings as well is that 80% of suburban Austin, about 90% as you go towards downtown Austin, are not actively engaged in church. And when you hear that, you might be like, well, why is that ultimately a problem? And I would say if what we just read together is just like a myth or legend made up to inspire people, it's not a problem. In fact, the only problem might be that 10 or 20% of people do go to church and are wasting their time and have built their whole life on a false hope, on a lie. But if what we just read together is history, and if the resurrection of Jesus is for real, then this is the greatest problem facing the part of the world that we live, and there is not a close second. Notice when I say that, I don't mean that the people in the 80% are somehow worse than the people in the 20%. This is not like a better, a good, bad, anything like that. This is the idea that the people in the 20% ideally have more access to, more opportunity to the hope of the world. That if we were really made by Jesus for relationship with Jesus, if peace is ultimately really only found in him, if the purpose and meaning that we search for is found in him, if life is better with him in it than without him in it, if he is our hope, our salvation, if heaven and hell are real, there is no close second in terms of issues that we could address, problems that we could try to overcome with our lives. No social issue, no political issue, no economic, no medical, there's nothing. If Jesus really is the hope of the world, no greater responsibility for the church to lean into. Which I know for a lot of you, probably all of you, that's not just a number. And that's not just a pie chart. 1.8 million people in Austin that don't go to church, that's a huge number. But you know their names. You know stories. I grew up in that 80%. I grew up not engaged in church. Today, in this moment, some of my most important family, some of my greatest friends are in that 80%. You know names, you know people, you know stories. In that 80%. Some of you today, maybe you're like, I'm a part of the 80%, and I'm trying to see, is there any real reason? Is there any valid hope to join the 20%? It's why our mission, why we exist in one statement, is to inspire people to follow Jesus. We can't decide for people. We can't force people. We can't coerce people. All we can do is we can give valid reason, valid evidence, compelling hope, and provide environments that are conducive to taking a step in a relationship with Jesus. Opportunities that are conducive to take a step in a relationship with Jesus. Resources and relationships. Because we fundamentally believe that life is better with Jesus in it. That he makes life better. Not easier necessarily, but that the lows of life are better to go through with him. And the highs of life are better to go through with him as well. And that's why if we were successful at that, like if our mission happened, if that's reality, then our future kind of reality that we hope and dream of together is our vision to make Jesus relevant for everyone, for all people, for the nations, for whom it should not be difficult, relevant for everyone in Greater Austin. That we would talk about Jesus in such a way that there's clear understanding as to why he adds value to my marriage, to my relationships, to my parenting, to my job, to my life. That I understand that real peace and meaning and purpose and forgiveness are found in him. That we do not make it unnecessarily difficult. And we stay laser focused on the things that we are doing that make it difficult, and that we address it, that we apologize for it when it happens, and we make a change because this is what we must stay focused on. And we dream that one day, and obviously this is a God-sized dream. It only happens if he shows up and wants this to happen. But we dream of what if that pie chart switched? What if instead of 80 disengaged, it was 80 engaged? That is the normal. That's almost the expectation. To say, yeah, I'm willing to talk about what it looks like for Jesus to be engaged in my life because he's so relevant in my life. What would it look like if those charts switched in one of the most influential cities in the world today? Practically, the way we might kind of describe this, if this visual helps, of like, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean to try to create a church that doesn't make it unnecessarily difficult? We talk about sometimes trying to create a church that has all the rungs on the ladder. I might talk about it this way. You know, you've been to a place before, you've been to a concert perhaps, you've been to a restaurant or something where you showed up and it's like there was some insider knowledge that you didn't have access to. It was like people knew how to dress, they knew where to park, they knew where to go, they knew what to order. And the whole time you're just like uncomfortable because you're like, I don't know like exactly how you got on the inside, but I'm clearly not. And there's a gap or there's a distance. It would be so easy to create a church that's missing the bottom two rungs on the ladder. So easy to just make the assumption as you're walking through the door that you already believe what we believe. That when you hear a title, one of the 66 books of the Bible, that you know what that is, that you're familiar with some of the authors, that you have no questions about the fact that we say a guy who lived 2,000 years ago that died and came back to life is now God, and everybody should just be good with that. That you have no questions about the Bible or any pushbacks or any prior difficult experiences with church. We're just going to assume when you come in that you already know why we're doing corporate karaoke together to just start our time, and no confusion or weirdness about what that is, right? Like it would be so easy to say, man, we've been around it for so long, we've spoken the language for so long, you should just be there as well. And we've said from day one, no, like we are going to stay laser focused on having all of the rungs on the ladder. which I want to be really clear about too. That also means we're not going to try to build a church that doesn't have the top rungs. Like, hey, we're just focused on like, hey, could you find us okay, but there's nothing after that? No. Our desire is to say, can we build one with all of the rungs on the ladder? That yes, discovering Jesus is accessible, but so is following him, taking next steps in a relationship with him, and then knowing him. And some of those later rooms of faith, that intimate desire of our heart to know him on a personal level. And how do we provide environments for all of those things? How do we make sure that the website is conducive, that you know where you're going when you look at it, or it provides enough information to know what to expect? How do we make sure coming in from the parking lot that you are valued, that it's clear where it is that you are going to go? How do we make sure that once you're here in this room, that we use language that it's simple, it's clear, it's clarifying? How do we provide groups and environments and resources to say, I know how to take the next step in my relationship with Jesus? That's what we're trying to stay laser focused on. And how you personally could choose to engage or be a part of that. Kind of what I said in the beginning when I was just so practical at the end. There have historically, from the beginning of Northpoint, there have been 4 things that we talk about, which we very creatively named just the 4 things. That's how we talk about them. There are 4 things or 4 ways to say, yeah, when I'm engaged, this is not the end all be all of faith, but these are some of the ways I can be a part of what's happening. To say I'm not just like attending, but yeah, I am a part of Northpoint. One of those, kind of the first, and this is in no particular order, but one of those is serving here. To say I am on the front lines. I'm giving my most valuable resource in terms of my time, and I am saying I'm going to be a part of creating what it is that people think of when they think of Northpoint. I'm going to be a part of investing in the heart of the next generation in Wamba or Upstreet, Transit or Inside Out, our kids and students environments. I'm going to be part of guest services and shape people's experiences when they're walking in through the door, where research would say that most people decide within 7 seconds of walking into the foyer whether or not they want to come back next week. Do I feel safe? Do I feel connected? Do I know where to go? You get to be a part of shaping that environment. Shaping environments like these, large group environments through our production teams or so on, or digitally what it is that we're doing online, or our marketplace events throughout the week, the other 6 days of the week that we utilize this building to serve our community. And you use whatever skill or gifting or talent available to you to engage in, and you are quite literally making the mission and vision a reality. The second, again, not in any particular order, but the second is groups. We just did a series talking all about the value of groups, but this is the idea that circles are better than rows. And I like saying that as a communicator that's passionate about what happens on Sunday mornings. This is a foundational piece. It's a starting point. It's not how you keep going through the ladder. That happens in the context of groups, of circles. This idea that we are better together. Circles are the place where you are known and supported by others, and where you know and you support others. It takes this monologue in this one-way format and it turns it into a dialogue where you can push back, you can disagree, you can ask questions. And that is really the place where we ultimately grow. The third of the 4 things is the one that I would say maybe has the biggest impact on the heart, if you will, when it comes to the heart being aligned with our mission and vision, and that's giving. And I say that because if you choose to start giving, for most people, some yes, but for most people that's not an easy step. For most people that starts uncomfortable. And Jesus is so clear that our heart is tied into our stuff, that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also, that you cannot serve both God and money, but that you're going to choose one, right? And the reason it's uncomfortable for a lot of us is that's a step of trust. There's fear involved with that. Maybe we've had bad experiences with that before. And I don't want to over-spiritualize it because you're kind of trusting both, right? Yes, there's a trusting God element to that, 100%. He's so clear about the generous posture, the generous response that should be a Christian's response to Jesus. And you're also trusting a place, right? You're trusting humans. You're trusting Northpoint with that. And that can be a difficult step to take. It doesn't usually start easy for most people, but it's very common to say down the line, as I start to connect, the life change, as I start to take on a new level of ownership, as I try to trust God with that uncomfortable step, as I realize when we see baptism stories like the one that we did today, that I was part of creating the environment, part of putting people in place to make those types of moments possible for God to show up and do his thing. There's something about that aligning piece that says, yeah, I'm not just on the back row looking in, but now this is something where I'm a part of this. I'm trying to make the mission and vision a reality in the part of the world where we live. And the last one of the four things is very simply inviting. Because think about what happens when you invite, right? When you invite, you're kind of putting your own name a little bit. You're putting your own reputation on the line a little bit. Like, hey, trust me, it's not going to be weird. I really hope, right? I mean, you're like taking some ownership with that. And what I love happens when you invite is it changes everything about the lens. It changes everything about the way you see this place. Because you don't invite for a while, you don't invite for a couple of years, and it comes a little bit about my parking spot, somebody sitting in my seat, you know, I hope they play my songs. They've talked about this topic before, I know where this is going. When you invite somebody new, you're like, oh my gosh, I hope they explain why we're singing these 3 songs, and I hope they don't do any more than 3 songs, because it's the weirdest part for my friend, and I hope Jordan doesn't say anything weird on stage, and I hope, right, you have a totally different lens, and what's happening is your heart is aligning with, is taking ownership of our mission and vision as we dream of those pie charts being reversed, of the numbers being reversed in our city. To make it really practical here at the end, to be like, okay, how do I take one of those? Or how do I take the next step if I'm doing one of those? npaustin.com/what's next, or very simply, the QR code's on your chair, on the screen right now, the screen if you're watching online. These next steps kind of live at the top there. So this is a really great resource to go to if you're curious about getting in a group, curious about taking a step to start serving. How is it that I might start giving or automate my giving so I don't skip and all that kind of stuff, but it's like, no, I'm going to prioritize what is most important. All of those next steps are kind of available on there. It's a perfect resource place to kind of go to if you're looking to take one of those next steps. If you're fully engaged here, you're like, yeah, I do all 4 of those things regularly. I mean, the message to you is really thank you. This is how we make this mission and vision a reality. Again, it is not somebody just up here on stage, not somebody with a microphone or anything like that. It is all of us collectively together. So thank you for your trust, for your willingness, for your sacrifice to do each of those things. And I want to make sure to leave an opportunity here at the end because of the fact that, like I said, when you engage here, we are Northpoint. We want to make the decisions along with you that shape these environments. And so we put together an anonymous Google form where you can actually give us feedback on how we're doing with that. If you text not difficult to 97000, you're going to get a Google form that has 2 questions on it. It says, 1, are we doing anything that makes it unnecessarily difficult for you to engage or for you to take a next step? Or is there anything we're doing that's making it unnecessarily difficult to invite a friend, invite somebody with you? And I would encourage you to be as candid as you possibly can be. It is anonymous. We are going to take these with our leadership team, and we are going to look through these. We take it seriously because we understand the gravitational pull towards making it difficult, towards assuming, towards just speaking a language like everybody knows. And we want to stay laser focused on, man, what are the ways that we're doing good at this, but what are the ways that we need to adjust? What are the things we need to change? Your voice in that means so much to us because we'll never be perfect. We have to keep our eyes on this. Ultimately, for me, when I think about those 4 things and I think about, showing up and getting invited to Northpoint for the first time when I was in that 80% number, it was stepping into those 4 things that really, for me, helped me take personal ownership of what we're doing. For me, I want to desire with you to say, hey, let's not make it difficult together. Because Jesus, who is so clear that it does not need to be difficult. It is him and him alone. Paul, so clear. Peter, so clear. James, so clear. Let's not make it difficult. That's not just on any one of us, but that's all of us collectively together. Let's not make it difficult together. Would you guys pray with me? Father, thank you that you are here with us right now in this moment. That part is simple. You're always with us. God, you desire a relationship with us more than anything else. And God, I just really ask in this moment that you make that so abundantly clear to us, that it's simple to have access to you, and that if we have access to you, that this is worth devoting our lives to figure out how to point others to you. God, I'm so grateful that you choose to partner with us. You choose to use us in this way to have this kind of meaning and purpose in our lives. It's humbling, it's overwhelming, and we just love you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray these things. Amen. Thank you guys so much for tuning in or being here today. We'll start a new series next week.